The blades of mercy, the sky of Zethra was burning red, the smoke of fallen ships painting long shadows across the ruined battlefield. The war had ended, but the silence that followed was worse than screams. A single human, battered, blood-soaked, and barely standing, dragged himself across the scorched metal ground. His name was Captain Rian Vale, a medic-turned-soldier, lost behind enemy lines when his squad was wiped out. From the distance, he heard a faint cry. High, trembling, not human. He followed the sound, limping through the wreckage until he saw it. A small alien child, scales cracked, covered in ash, and clutching a torn piece of armor far too large for her tiny frame. Her eyes, bright silver like molten moons, met his, full of fear. She was no ordinary child. Her markings showed she was from the Valari high blood line, one of the ruling clans of the alien empire that had once called humans animals of war. Rian knew the risk. If the Valari patrols found him near their young, they would flay him alive. Yet when the child tried to crawl toward her dead guardian and collapsed, Rian's soldier's heart broke. He knelt beside her, pulling out his last medkit. "Easy now," he whispered, pressing a coagulant patch over the wound. The girl tried to push him away, whispering in her alien tongue, "Don't touch, human." Rian smiled weakly. "Then you better tell your people I'm terrible at listening." Before he could say another word, a roar echoed through the valley. A squad of Valari soldiers, their armor black as glass. Approaching fast, the girl looked terrified. "They will kill you," she said, her small hands gripping his wrist. "I know," Rian replied calmly, "but if they must kill me, they'll have to go through me first." The Valari surrounded them. Their commander, tall and masked, shouted in their native tongue, "Step away!" "Human filth," Rian raised his hands. "The child is hurt." The soldiers ignored him. One of them swung his plasma blade. Slicing across his chest, Rian grunted but didn't move. Another blade cut into his arm, another through his leg. 18 in total. One for each of the warriors in the squad. Each wound should have killed him, but Rian didn't fall. He used his body to shield the child until her screams stopped and her small voice whispered, "Please, stop hurting him." The commander hesitated, lowering his weapon slightly. The human collapsed, his blood steaming on the cold ground. The child crawled to him, trembling. "He saved me," she whispered, touching his face. The commander stood frozen, watching the impossible sight. A human dying for a Valari child? He barked orders, and the soldiers lifted Rian's broken body. For the first time in their history, a human prisoner was carried, not dragged. Darkness swallowed Rian as the sounds faded, but the last thing he felt was a tiny hand clutching his fingers. "Please don't die, human," she whispered. "Please." When he woke again, he was no longer on the battlefield. Instead, he lay in a vast hall lit by golden light. Hundreds of Valari stood kneeling, their blades lowered to the floor. The child, now wearing royal robes, stood beside him, tears in her silver eyes, and when Rian tried to rise, the High Commander himself bowed. "For taking 18 blades to save our heir," the alien said. "We kneel before the human who showed us what honor means." Rian's voice cracked. "I was just doing what was right." The hall fell silent. The child smiled softly. "Then, human Rian," she said, "you are now under the protection of the Valari Empire. Forever. The child of the Empire." When Rian Vale opened his eyes again, the golden hall still shimmered before him. The pain of his wounds had faded, replaced by the strange warmth of alien healing light. He could feel his heartbeat slow and steady, every scar closed by threads of glowing silk. He looked around and saw guards in ornate armor standing at every corner, silent like statues. He remembered the battle, the child, the blades, the voices shouting in anger. He remembered falling. Then the image of the little alien girl came back, her trembling hands, her tears shining like silver fire. He tried to sit up, but his body was weak. A healer with dark blue skin stepped forward and bowed. "Human, please rest." "The princess ordered that you live," Rian blinked. "Princess?" Before he could ask more, the great doors opened, and the small child entered. no longer in torn clothes but wearing royal silks of white and gold. Jewels shimmered on her forehead, yet her eyes still held that same innocent light. She smiled when she saw him awake. "You are alive," she whispered, walking closer. "You were not supposed to live after 18 blades." Rian gave a faint smile. "I've been told I'm bad at dying." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Unused to hearing a human speak with humor in the high palace, the princess climbed onto the edge of his bed, sitting beside him like a child who ignored all rules of royalty. "They call me Saria Valari," she said, "and you are Rian Vale." "From the world called Earth." Rian nodded slowly. "You remember my name?" Saria smiled. "You whispered it when you were bleeding. You said, 'If anyone asks, tell them Rian Vale was here.'" He chuckled weakly. "Sounds dramatic." The child tilted her head. "What does it mean?" "It means," Rian said softly, "I didn't want to disappear." The hall grew quiet. Even the guards lowered their eyes. The words of a dying human carried strange weight. Later that day, the High Commander arrived. He was the same alien who had once struck Rian on the battlefield. Now he bowed low before the human. "The Council wishes to see you," he said. They brought Rian into the throne chamber of the Valari Empire, a place carved from crystal and light. The Empress herself sat upon a floating dais, her wings folded like silver cloth. She studied Rian with cold, unreadable eyes. "You are the one who took 18 blades for my daughter," she said. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Why?" Rian stood straight though his knees shook. "Because no child deserves to die alone." The Empress tilted her head slightly. "Even an enemy child?" "Especially an enemy," he replied, the hall murmured. Shock moved through the crowd like wind. The Empress rose slowly, walking down the steps until she stood before him. She looked at her daughter, then back at him. "You changed something in her," she said. "And in us," she turned to the council. "From this day, the human Rian Vale is under royal protection. He will serve as guardian to Princess Saria." The guards slammed their weapons in salute. The human blinked in disbelief. "Guardian?" The princess grinned. "Yes, Rian Vale of Earth, you saved me once. Now you must stay to protect me again." Days turned into weeks. Rian recovered and began to learn their customs. He trained under the watch of the Valari elite, who still whispered behind his back. Some called him the Blade Bearer, others the Fool of Mercy. But none dared challenge him openly. Saria followed him everywhere, asking endless questions about Earth. "Do you have skies this blue?" she asked one day while standing on the palace balcony. Rian smiled. "Sometimes, when the war is far away." "And do you have stories?" she asked, "of heroes who fight even when they are weak?" Rian nodded. "We call them humans." That night, while he walked through the halls, he overheard the counselors whispering. "He should not stay," said one. "Humans bring chaos." "He may be a spy." "The princess trusts him," said another. "And her trust is dangerous." Rian said nothing, but the words stayed in his heart. He had seen fear like this before, the kind born not from hate but from ignorance. One evening, alarms blared across the palace. The lights dimmed and the walls shuddered. Enemy forces, a rival Valari clan, had attacked the capital. Explosions thundered outside. The guards rushed to form ranks. Rian grabbed his armor and sprinted toward the princess's chamber. Inside, Saria stood trembling beside her protectors. "Rian!" she cried, running toward him. He knelt, checking her for injuries. "Stay behind me," he said. The doors burst open. Black-armored assassins stormed in. Moving fast as shadows, Rian drew a fallen guard's blade. His wounds still ached, but his instincts returned. Steel clashed with plasma. Sparks rained. One assassin struck. Another lunged. Rian blocked, rolled, countered. His body moved on reflex, protecting the princess behind him. When the last attacker fell, smoke filled the room. Rian stood bleeding again but alive. Saria clung to him. "You always bleed for me," she whispered. Tears in her voice. He smiled faintly. "Seems to be my thing." At that moment, the Empress entered, saw the slain enemies, and then saw her daughter safe. Her expression softened for the first time. She turned to her soldiers. This human has shed his blood twice for our bloodline. Let all know. His name shall be honored." The soldiers knelt again. Their blades touched the floor. The same scene as before. But this time, Rian was awake to see it, and somewhere deep inside him, a quiet thought rose. Maybe mercy is stronger than fear. The human guardian. The weeks following the attack passed like a strange dream for Rian Vale. The palace that once treated him as a curiosity now looked at him with something close to reverence. Servants bowed when he walked past, warriors touched their blades in silent salute, and even the counselors who once whispered about removing him had grown careful with their words. But to Rian, none of it mattered. He had seen enough courts to know that honor could turn to envy in a heartbeat. All that mattered was that the little princess was safe. Every morning he trained in the courtyard of white stone, under a sky that shimmered with twin suns. The Valari guards watched him in quiet disbelief. His movements were slower than theirs, less elegant, but there was a stubborn rhythm to his fighting style, a raw, human determination that made even the most disciplined warrior pause. When they struck him during practice, he did not flinch. When he fell, he got up again. They started calling him the man who does not yield, a title that carried both respect and unease. Syria often watched from the palace balcony, her small hands gripping the rail as she studied her guardian. She no longer called him simply human. To her, he was Rian, the one who never broke his promise. She spent hours each day at his side, asking about Earth, about human oceans and rain, about what love and courage meant. He told her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it, and that love was when someone's safety mattered more than your own. The girl listened quietly, storing every word as though it were sacred scripture. One evening, as crimson light bathed the city below, the Empress summoned Rian to the throne room once more. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You have done what no human has done before," she said. "You have earned our respect. Yet respect breeds danger. Many in the outer clans now whisper that the Valari Empire bows to a human. They see weakness where I see strength. The council demands that you be tested, not in battle but in loyalty." Rian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He understood politics too well. "What must I do?" he asked. The Empress gestured toward the map hovering above her dais. A transport convoy carrying medical supplies was ambushed near the frontier moons. "We suspect traitors among our own. You will go there as my envoy, and protector of the princess who will lead the mission." Rian blinked in surprise. "You are sending her?" "Yes," the Empress said, her tone heavy. "If we hide her away, they will call her fragile. If she leads, they will see her strength. You will ensure she returns alive." The next morning, Rian and Syria departed the capital aboard a sleek warship of silver and blue. The stars stretched like rivers of light beyond the viewport. For the first time since his arrival, Rian felt something close to freedom. Syria sat beside him, her eyes wide with excitement. "I have never left the inner worlds before," she said. "Mother says the frontier is wild." "Wild usually means honest," Rian replied with a faint smile. "You'll see what real people live like." Their ship descended days later onto the moon of Irath, a barren world scarred by old wars. The convoy station lay in ruins, charred metal, broken towers, and silence. Rian's instincts screamed that something was wrong. He motioned the guards to spread out while he scanned the horizon. Moments later, a blast tore through the wreckage, throwing them backward. Out of the smoke came armored figures bearing the crest of a rival Valari clan, the same assassins who had attacked the palace. Rian pulled Syria behind a fallen pillar as plasma fire streaked through the air. "Stay low," he shouted. She clutched his arm, terrified but refusing to cry. The guards formed a defensive ring, but they were outnumbered 5-1. Rian grabbed a fallen blaster and returned fire, every shot precise, every movement calculated. He was no longer the broken soldier who fell on the battlefield. He was a guardian, forged by pain. When an enemy blade sliced across his shoulder, he turned, caught the attacker's wrist, and drove the blade into the ground with brutal force. The sound of combat roared around them, smoke and sparks painting the sky red. Then Syria screamed his name. He turned to see a sniper taking aim from a high ridge. Without thinking, Rian sprinted toward her, pushing the princess down as the plasma bolt ripped across his back. He fell hard, smoke rising from the wound, but he refused to collapse. He rose again, shielding her with his own body until the remaining guards overpowered the last attackers. When silence finally returned, Rian was still standing. Barely. His armor was shattered, his breathing shallow. Syria knelt beside him, her small hands pressing against the burn. "You promised not to die again," she said through tears. Rian smiled weakly. "I'm trying, Princess. I really am." By the time reinforcements arrived, the attackers were gone, leaving only their insignia behind. The Empress's agents confirmed the worst. The ambush had been orchestrated by members of the High Council itself. They had wanted to eliminate both the princess and her human guardian to restore the purity of Valari rule. The news spread like wildfire through the Empire. Across the stars, soldiers whispered of the human who bled for their heir twice, thrice, again and again. For some, he was a symbol of shame, a reminder that compassion came from an outsider. But for others, he became something far more dangerous, a legend. That night, as he rested in the medical bay, Syria sat beside his bed, refusing to leave. She took his hand in hers, small and trembling but warm. "You said love means someone's safety matters more than yours," she whispered. "Then I understand it now." Rian opened his eyes slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "You've learned too fast," he said with a faint grin. The child smiled through her tears. "Maybe humans aren't the only ones who can love like that," she said. Outside the window, the twin moons rose, and for the first time, the Valari stars shone a little brighter, as if the universe itself was beginning to remember what mercy looked like. The Empire of Shadows weeks after the ambush on Irath, the Valari Empire sat on the edge of unrest. What had once been a shining civilization built on pride and conquest now trembled under the weight of whispers. In every outpost, in every garrison, soldiers told the story of a human who had taken 18 blades for their princess, a man who bled again and again but refused to fall. Some called him a fool of mercy, others called him a ghost of war, but all agreed that something ancient had awakened in the Empire's heart, something they had forgotten since the age before empires. Compassion. The Empress watched the storm grow from her throne, her golden eyes heavy with thought. She knew the Council's betrayal was deeper than a simple power grab. If they were willing to murder her daughter, then they had already begun building a shadow empire of their own. Rian Vale's recovery was slow but not peaceful. His body healed, but his mind carried the weight of too many deaths. He spent his nights awake, pacing the glass corridors of the palace, haunted by the sight of the assassin's insignia, the mark of the High Regent of War, Lord Tyrax. Tyrax was not just a counselor. He was the supreme commander of the Valari fleets, a man who had conquered 6 worlds and enslaved 3. Rian had seen his type before, men who believed power could erase conscience. The difference was that Tyrax commanded an empire of billions. Rian knew that if the Empress hesitated, Tyrax would strike again, and next time, there would be no child left to save. One morning, the Empress summoned Rian and the princess to a private chamber deep within the palace. The air shimmered with security fields and no guards were present. "You were right," she said quietly. "The attack was planned from within. Tyrax seeks to overthrow me and crown himself emperor. But he underestimates how far the legend of the human has spread. The people have begun to see you as a symbol, Rian Vale, and symbols cannot be killed so easily." Rian frowned. "I didn't come here to be a symbol, Your Majesty. I just wanted to protect the child." The Empress's voice softened. "And that is exactly why they believe in you. Because you never asked for anything. Because you act from heart, not ambition. That is what frightens them the most." Before Rian could answer, Syria spoke, her young voice trembling with courage. "Then let us not hide any more. Let us show them that humans and Valari can stand together." Both adults turned to her, startled by the certainty in her tone. The Empress smiled faintly. Perhaps my daughter understands this galaxy better than all of us. Plans were made in secret. A journey would begin. A ceremonial tour across the frontier systems to show the Empire that the princess lived, that the human guardian stood beside her, that the old ways of cruelty and hierarchy were fading. But within the dark halls of the High Regent's citadel, Tyrax listened to the same rumor and burned with rage. "A human!" he roared, striking the marble table with his clawed hand. "They bow to a human." His generals knelt before him, afraid to meet his gaze. "Then let them see what fear truly is," he hissed. "Send the Shadow Fleet. I want the girl's ship burned from the sky." When the royal cruiser Seraphis Light left orbit days later, it shimmered like a silver arrow cutting through the stars. Rian stood on the bridge beside Seria, who wore her ceremonial armor for the first time. A gift from her mother, lined with the same alloy once used by the Valari kings of old. "You look terrifying," Rian said with a grin. She smirked. "That's the idea." Their laughter echoed across the chamber, a brief peace before the storm. Hours later, alarms screamed through the ship. "Unidentified vessels closing fast," shouted the helmsman. Rian looked out the viewport and saw the dark silhouettes of 20 warships emerging from hyperspace. Each bore the crimson insignia of Tyrax, the Shadow Fleet. The first salvo hit before they could react. Energy blasts tore through the shields, hurling crew members across the deck. Rian grabbed Seria and forced her into the command chair. "Stay here. You're the symbol they want. You can't die." He sprinted to the weapons console, taking command of the defense grid. Turrets roared to life, answering fire with fire. Explosions flashed outside, painting the void in streaks of white and red. But the Shadow Fleet was relentless, closing in like a pack of predators. Suddenly, the ship's AI announced, "Hull integrity critical. Power failing." Rian turned to Seria. "There's an escape craft near the lower hangar. You need to go now." She shook her head violently. "Not without you." "Seria, listen to me," he said, gripping her shoulders. "If you die, everything we fought for dies with you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "Then promise you'll follow." "I promise," he lied gently. She ran, escorted by her guards, while Rian stayed behind. The ship groaned under another blast, lights flickering. He sealed the bridge and activated the manual override. "If I can't win," he muttered, "then I'll make sure they don't either." He rerouted the reactor's core to overload, sending a distress beacon into space. Moments later, as the enemy ships surrounded him, Rian watched the escape pod streak away like a falling star. "Live, kid," he whispered. "Make it matter." The core detonated, and the explosion lit the void like a second sun. The shockwave crippled half of the Shadow Fleet and vanished into the silence of space. Far away, the Empress received the transmission. Her hands trembled as the screen went dark. The room was silent except for the voice of her daughter, faint over the communicator. "He kept his promise, Mother. He made them see." Across the Empire, stories spread once more of the human who stood against an armada alone, who bought the future with his own fire, and somewhere, deep beyond the wreckage fields, in the drifting remains of the Seraphis Light, a faint signal blinked in the darkness, a heartbeat lost, but not yet gone. The return of the Forgotten Guardian months passed after the explosion of the Seraphis Light, and the Empire mourned the loss of the human guardian who had become its living legend. Every city raised monuments of silver stone carved in his likeness, and every child of the Valari Empire learned his name before they learned the stars. The Empress declared 7 days of mourning, and her daughter, Princess Seria, wore black robes woven with the symbol of the 18 blades. The people whispered that even the suns dimmed for a moment when Rian Vale died. Yet, beyond the borders of civilized space, in a broken field of drifting wreckage and silent flame, something still moved among the debris. Inside the shattered remains of a life pod barely large enough for one, a faint heartbeat pulsed against the silence. Rian Vale was alive, barely. His body was burned, his armor fused to his skin, his breath shallow. But the emergency stasis unit within the pod had kept his heart beating, one slow thud after another, refusing to let death take what it had already claimed once before. He drifted for days, maybe weeks, time lost meaning in the endless dark. Finally, scavengers found the pod, miners from the outer rim who combed battlefields for scrap metal and spare oxygen tanks. When they pried open the hatch, they found the human inside and almost sealed it again, thinking him dead. But when Ryan's fingers twitched, they pulled him out and carried him to their station hidden within an asteroid. The station was no palace. Rusted walls, recycled air, the stench of oil and dust. But the people there were free. Humans, hybrids, and exiles who refused to kneel to any empire. They nursed Ryan back to life with crude medicine and stubborn hope. For many weeks he remained in fevered dreams, haunted by fire and screams, by the sight of Syria's escape pod vanishing into the void. Sometimes he woke, whispering her name. Sometimes he laughed bitterly, thinking of the irony that a soldier from Earth had become a symbol to an alien race. Yet deep within him burned the same old spark, that unyielding instinct to rise again. When he finally stood on his own, the miners gathered around him. They had heard rumors, of course. The galaxy thrived on rumor. "You're him, aren't you?" asked an old mechanic whose skin shimmered faintly with crystal veins. The blade bearer. "The human guardian." Rian shook his head slowly. "That man died out there," he said. The mechanic smiled with the tired wisdom of someone who had seen too much. "Maybe, but legends don't stay dead." From that moment, Ryan became part of their hidden world. He helped repair their defense turrets, trained their young pilots, taught them strategies used by Earth's armies. Simple things: discipline, compassion, teamwork. They began calling themselves the Free Dawn, a coalition of drifters and outcasts who believed that freedom meant protecting one another, not dominating the weak. And without meaning to, Rian became their leader. He never wore a crown, never sat on a throne. But when danger came, and it always did, they looked to him first. One evening, while he inspected the reactor shields, a transmission crackled through the station's comms. A voice, young, shaking, familiar, whispered through static, "If anyone can hear me, this is Princess Seria Valari. The Empire is falling." Ryan froze, the wrench slipping from his hand. The room went silent. The voice continued, distorted by interference. "The High Regent Tyrax has taken the capital. My mother has been imprisoned. They call for war against the outer worlds. Please, if anyone remembers what mercy is, help us." Then the signal cut out. For a long time, Rian said nothing. The miners watched him, waiting. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and steady but burning with purpose. "Get me a ship." The Free Dawn rallied instantly. Old cruisers that hadn't flown in decades were patched together overnight. Fighters were armed with scavenged weapons, shields rebuilt from cargo coils. They were not an army. They were a miracle held together by will alone. As Ryan suited up, the mechanic who had saved him years ago handed him a newly forged chest plate etched with 18 small marks. "For every blade you took," the old man said. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "Let's see if I can take a few more." When their fleet emerged from hyperspace on the edge of Valari territory, the stars seemed to hold their breath. The Shadow Fleet patrolled those sectors now, its black ships spreading across the void like a sickness. Ryan's voice came through every comm at once, calm and clear. "We're not here to conquer," he said. "We're here to remind them what honor looks like." The first clash was chaos. Small ships darting between giants, explosions blooming like suns. But the Free Dawn fought with something no empire could manufacture: conviction. And in the middle of the battle, as Ryan's ship tore through the enemy line, the Valari soldiers began hesitating. Some lowered their weapons. Some switched sides entirely. They had heard the old stories. The human who never yielded. The man who saved their princess. The myth had come alive again before their eyes. Back on the capital world, Syria stood behind the palace windows, watching the sky burn with streaks of light. She felt it, the same unexplainable pull in her heart, the same warmth that had once held her hand amid the fire. She turned to her mother's guard and whispered, "He's alive." The Empress closed her eyes and for the first time in months allowed herself to hope. "Then perhaps the stars have forgiven us," she said softly. Out in space, Rian Vale led the charge, his ship blazing through the darkness like a torch of vengeance and mercy combined. For every child who was told compassion is weakness, he said into the comms, remember the truth. Mercy is strength. The fleet roared in answer, their voices echoing through the void. And as the enemy lines broke, the galaxy began to change once more because one human had refused to stay dead, because one legend had returned to finish what mercy began. The war for the light. The battle for the Valari Empire stretched across 1,000 systems, and every world seemed to hold its breath as the story of the returning human spread like wildfire. The Free Dawn's fleet had become a symbol of impossible hope, a gathering of farmers, deserters, engineers, and dreamers who followed a man who refused to die. The old empires mocked them at first, calling them beggars in stolen ships, but when their squadrons vanished in flashes of light and silence, the laughter stopped. Rian Vale no longer fought for survival. He fought for meaning, for the promise he made to a frightened child long ago, for a galaxy that had forgotten mercy. His tactics were simple, his courage contagious, and his enemies discovered that fear could not break a man who had already given his life once. On the capital world of Vareth, Princess Saria watched from the observation spire as the night sky filled with burning trails of re-entry fire. Every explosion far above reminded her of the man she had lost and the man she believed was coming back. She had grown taller now, her eyes sharper, her voice stronger. No longer the trembling child hiding behind a medic's arm. The Empire called her the Daughter of Light, yet she knew that title belonged to him. Inside her chambers she kept his broken insignia, the metal badge scorched during the explosion of the Seraphis light. Whenever doubt crept in, she pressed it to her heart and whispered, "He will return." Her mother, weary but unbroken, placed a hand on her shoulder one evening and said softly, "If faith had a face, it would look like yours." Saria smiled faintly and answered, "Then let the stars see it." Far beyond Vareth's orbit, the war reached its climax. Lord Tyrax unleashed the full might of the Shadow Fleet, an armada so vast it eclipsed the suns. Planets burned, colonies vanished, and the Free Dawn found itself surrounded. Rian stood on the command deck of the Soul's Edge, staring at the tactical display that showed their doom. Yet there was no fear in his eyes. He had lived through worse. He had died through worse. "We can't win by strength," his second officer said. Rian nodded slowly. "Then we win by example." He transmitted an open frequency to every ship, friend or foe. His voice carried through the void, calm, tired, human. "This war isn't about bloodlines or empires," he said. "It's about the right to care, even for those who call you enemy. I took 18 blades to protect a child once. I'd take 1,000 more if it meant you remembered what we're fighting for." Silence followed his words, then murmurs across the channels. Valari captains lowering weapons, officers refusing to fire. Tyrax's fury exploded across the comms. "Obey your orders or be destroyed." But fear no longer ruled them. Some ships broke formation. Others turned their cannons on their masters. The Shadow Fleet began devouring itself from within. Rian seized the moment. "All units push forward." The Free Dawn surged like a storm, diving through gaps in the enemy line, tearing apart command cruisers and communications hubs. The black banners of Tyrax crumbled amid fire and chaos. When the flagship of the Shadow Fleet emerged from hyperspace, a monstrous vessel the size of a city, Rian's eyes hardened. "That's him," he said. "Take us in." The duel between the Soul's Edge and the Shadow flagship was the stuff of myth. Plasma bolts carved across the darkness, hulls split, flames rose like sunrise through vacuum. When the two ships collided near the atmosphere of Vareth, escape pods scattered like sparks. Rian led a boarding team through smoke-filled corridors, fighting deck by deck toward the bridge. Tyrax waited there, a towering figure in obsidian armor. "You should have stayed dead," the regent snarled. Rian lifted his rifle, his voice steady. "You first." Their battle was brutal, metal against flesh, will against fury. Tyrax struck with the precision of a machine. Rian with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Finally, as both bled and the ship cracked apart around them, Rian drove a blade through Tyrax's armor. "Empires fall," he whispered, "but mercy endures." He shoved the dying warlord into the collapsing reactor and staggered toward the escape bay. Flames chased him through the halls as he launched the pod. Below him, Vareth's skies burned with falling wreckage, but within that fire came hope. The Empress's palace trembled as debris rained down, and Saria ran to the balcony just as a pod streaked across the horizon, trailing smoke. It crashed into the palace gardens, sending a wave of dust through the air. Guards rushed forward, weapons raised, but she pushed past them, heart pounding. When the hatch opened and the smoke cleared, the figure that stepped out was barely standing. Armor cracked, face scarred, eyes exhausted yet alive. "Took you long enough," she whispered, tears breaking her voice. Rian smiled faintly, leaning on the edge of the pod. Traffic was bad. The Empress herself appeared behind her daughter, disbelief in her golden eyes. She knelt beside the human who had once been her prisoner and said quietly, "The Empire owes you more than life can repay." Rian shook his head. "Then repay it by never forgetting why I bled for you." Saria stepped forward and took his hand, her small fingers trembling against the roughness of his palm. "You taught me that mercy is the sharpest blade," she said. The courtyard fell silent as soldiers and servants alike knelt, not before a throne, but before a man who had reminded them what it meant to be alive. That night, the fires in the sky faded, leaving behind the brightest dawn the Empire had ever seen. The Free Dawn merged with Valari fleets to rebuild, and for the first time in centuries, peace did not feel like surrender. Stories of Rian Vale spread beyond borders, beyond species, beyond history. Children would someday ask if the man of the 18 blades was real, and parents would answer, "Real enough to save us all." And in the quiet garden where stars reflected in the pools of light, Rian sat beside Saria watching the horizon. "So what now?" she asked softly. He smiled, tired but content. "Now we teach them that compassion can rebuild what power destroyed." The wind stirred the trees, and somewhere far above, the twin suns rose together. A promise kept, a future reborn. The war for the light finally won. The legacy of the 18 Blades years passed since the final war that changed the face of the Valari Empire, and the stars themselves seemed quieter now, as if the universe had taken a long breath after centuries of chaos. The once divided realms were united under a new banner, not of conquest, but of compassion. The Empress stepped down peacefully, naming her daughter Saria the new ruler of the Reformed Alliance. They called it the Conquered of Dawn, an empire built not on fear but understanding, and at the heart of its symbol were 18 small golden blades, a tribute to the man who had bled for them all. Rian Vale never took a throne, nor accepted any title. He refused statues, refused medals, refused to be worshipped like a saint. He said he was just a man who did what needed to be done. Yet wherever he went, crowds would still gather. Soldiers would stand taller, children would whisper his name, and elders would bow their heads with quiet tears. He spent most of his days on a quiet moon orbiting the capital, a place the Valari called Irath's Garden. It was a sanctuary filled with crystal trees, silver rivers, and wind that carried the faint hum of ancient songs. Rian lived there simply, repairing machines, helping farmers, teaching young recruits about first aid instead of war. He told them that the true victory was not in killing, but in saving. Saria visited him often, though she was now Empress. She would arrive with her royal guard, but Rian always made her leave them outside the gate. They would walk through the garden together, sometimes speaking of policy and politics, sometimes saying nothing at all. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with twin streams of amber light, she turned to him and said softly, "You could have ruled this galaxy if you wanted to." Rian smiled faintly and shook his head. "Ruling it would have destroyed everything I tried to teach it. Power is a strange poison. Even mercy can't cure it if it takes root." Saria nodded, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. "You changed everything," she whispered. You changed me." He looked at her then, seeing not the frightened child he once shielded on the battlefield, but a woman who carried both strength and kindness in equal measure. "No," he said gently, "you changed yourself. I only showed you what was already there." As the years turned into decades, the legend of the 18 Blades became more than history. It became a story told to every generation, not of a warrior who conquered, but of a man who endured pain for a stranger. The tale spread beyond Valari space, carried by traders and travelers to human colonies that had long forgotten Earth's own compassion. It reached distant planets where machines ruled and reminded them of humanity's soul. It reached alien worlds where mercy was considered weakness and forced them to reconsider what strength truly meant. Rian's name became less a person and more a principle, the idea that empathy could outlast empires. Yet legends are heavy things to carry, even for those who inspire them. Rian grew older, slower, quieter. His hair turned silver, his scars faded into pale lines across weathered skin. He spent long nights sitting under the stars, sometimes staring at his hands as if remembering all the lives he couldn't save. The galaxy was at peace now, but peace brought its own kind of silence, the kind that made memories louder. One night, as a storm of comet light swept across the sky, Saria arrived alone, wearing no crown, no robes, just a simple cloak. She found him sitting on a bench made of old ship metal, watching the lights dance across the heavens. "You never rest," she said softly. He smiled. "Old soldiers forget how." She sat beside him, folding her hands. "The council wants to name a fleet after you. The Blades of Vale." He laughed gently, shaking his head. "They never learn, do they? I'd rather they named a hospital." They sat in silence for a long time, until Saria spoke again, her voice quiet and heavy with emotion. "Do you ever regret saving me?" Rian turned his gaze toward her, eyes soft and calm. "Never," he said simply, "because in saving you, I remembered who I was." Tears filled her eyes and she whispered, "You gave your pain so I could have peace." He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "No," he said, "I gave it so we could have peace." That night was the last time she saw him alive. In the morning, the garden was still, the wind soft. Rian Vale sat on that same bench, head bowed slightly, a faint smile frozen on his face as if he had fallen asleep while watching the sunrise. Beside him lay the old insignia of the Valari Guard, the symbol of the 18 Blades, polished and shining like new. The Empress ordered no grand funeral. Instead, she decreed a day of silence across the stars. Every engine stopped, every weapon was powered down, and for one full day, the galaxy stood still to honor the man who had taught them to see light even in blood and sorrow. In time, monuments rose anyway, not statues of him holding a weapon, but of him kneeling beside a small alien child, a hand resting gently on her shoulder. The inscription beneath read, "Mercy is not surrender. Mercy is strength." Centuries later, when both human and Valari histories merged into one shared chronicle, scholars would argue whether Rian Vale truly existed or was just a myth born from war. But out on the edge of known space, in Arath's garden, the winds still carried a faint voice, a whisper among the crystal trees, that said, "Protect the innocent, even if the world calls it foolish." And those who heard it never doubted. Because legends may fade, but truth echoes forever, and so, the man who took 18 blades for an alien child became something greater than a soldier, greater than a savior. He became the living memory of what it means to be human,